Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are receiving backlash from inside the Republican Party after defending the tech industry's reliance on foreign-born engineers. In separate social media posts, Ramaswamy said it comes down to culture in the U.S., while Musk said that the number of, quote, super talented engineers and super motivated in the USA is far too low. Their comments come as the two head to Washington and head up the Department of Government Efficiency. And it also highlights Silicon Valley's hiring practices as President-elect Trump prepares to implement his immigration strategy. Joining me now is the Hill's White House correspondent, Alex Gangitano. Alex, thanks so much for coming on. Let's start by talking about these two. With the influence that Musk and Ramaswamy are going to bring to Washington, do you think that they're beginning to fracture the party before Republicans take control?
Yeah, it's a good question. We know that these two were selected by Trump to head up this Department of Government Efficiency. That had to do with cutting waste and finding areas where the government could be more efficient, but they're weighing in on other issues. We know that Musk seems to have a lot of influence. He helped kill a bipartisan negotiated government funding bill that ended up causing Republicans to go back to the drawing board to figure out how to keep the government open last week. So his influence is growing. Ramaswamy as well. And as we know, the Trump administration is preparing to crack down on immigration. That was a big focus on Trump's campaign in 2024. But these two are defending the use of foreign-born engineers, basically both pointing to a lack of engineers in the US. We're even seeing Musk engage with some users on social media who are suggesting that his company is denying opportunities to Americans, saying that they don't understand the situation. So Musk is pretty forceful in talking about or defending the use of a lot of immigrants at his companies. Meanwhile, Ramaswamy is as well. So I do think it's starting some conversations within the Republican Party about what cracking down on immigration means, especially as Musk is a CEO of a major company that relies on immigrants.
Their comments, of course, are highlighting Silicon Valley's hiring practices. Do you think that the two could also influence the narrative around immigration and H1-B visas in the Republican Party?
I do. We've seen already Elon Musk, while he's engaging on this issue on social media, he talks about how his companies would prefer to hire Americans, but that it's an incredibly slow, because it's an incredibly slow work visa process to get these foreign-born engineers who are talented to work for him, but that there's just not enough Americans. So I do think it's starting a conversation about removing some caps on green cards for skilled immigrants, and what it means to be, a foreign-born engineer, giving back to, an essential company like Tesla, and how to, figure out the visa process so it's not as slow as it is. I think he's definitely starting a lot of those conversations.
All right, we've talked tech. Let's move on to talking about energy. As President-elect Trump prepares to take office, he has been tapping key players when it comes to how the U.S. is going to address energy and environmental issues. Tell us about who are some of the key appointments that we should be watching in 2025, and how will Trump's team change environmental regulations and U.S. policy on oil production?
Yeah, we know that the Trump team is looking to expand U.S. energy development, and there's some key figures that I think are going to make some serious headlines and environmental issues next year, and will have a big hand in helping the Trump agenda when it comes to energy. So that includes people like former North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, and Chris Wright, the selection to lead the Department of Energy. And Burgum is somebody who is, if he's confirmed to lead the Interior Department, he'd likely oversee things like oil and gas drilling on federal lands. That's something that we know Trump was saying, drill, baby, drill, a lot of times on the campaign trail. That was a big focus of him. And that's in sharp contrast to the outgoing Secretary, Biden's Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland, who has been a major ally of environmentalist groups. So I think we're going to see Burgum shake a lot of things up. And it all stems from the top with how Trump wants to increase oil production.
And we've also seen him appoint another ally into his administration. He has tapped Kari Lake to lead Voice of America, the U.S.'s broadcasting network that is funded by the federal government. And this move has been sparking some concerns that the network could shift to partisan programming. Has Trump or Lake laid out any plans they have for Voice of America, and are the concerns valid?
Yeah, I think concerns are definitely brewing. We haven't heard exactly what their plans would be for Voice of America, but I think given Lake's background, she has a history of attacks on the media and floating some unfounded theories, especially when it comes to voter fraud. There's a lot of people who value the work of Voice of America on the global stage that are concerned about what she could do to the platform. So, Voice of America is a government funded global news agency, but, as she's someone who, as you mentioned, is a staunch Trump ally, she could use it to basically be a megaphone to push pro Trump propaganda around the world. And that's something that, while our reporters are talking to sources about how they feel about her as the pick, are concerned about. And, she's somebody who it makes sense that she was added to the cabinet, considering how, or the administration, considering how loyal she's been to Trump and how close they are. But it is interesting that this objective and independent, federally funded news organization going to somebody who is clearly very pro Trump and has this history that concerns some people in that space.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Congress. There was a recent revelation that Republican Texas Representative Kay Granger has been living in an assisted living facility. Granger has missed every House vote after July 24th. She stepped down as chair of the House Appropriations Committee earlier this year. She didn't seek re-election, but are situations like these igniting conversations over how long and appropriate it is for lawmakers to stay in office?
Yeah, I think it's definitely starting conversations over just how reasonable it is to question if somebody has been in office for too long and has the mental stamina to stay in office. I mean, somebody like a Granger, when she was missing votes and not showing up, and the local news started looking into where she was and what she was doing. Meanwhile, decades back, it was considered inappropriate to question why somebody who is an older member wasn't doing their work. And I think also, as she has ignited some of this conversation in Congress, of course, we know that President Biden ignited a lot of this conversation. He was, one of the, was a major target of Republicans over his age. We saw the Robert Hur report come out that mentioned that he might have not the mental stamina that he once did. And then we saw him on the debate stage, and the country got to see that he wasn't as sharp as he used to be. And then it felt appropriate to have conversations over if he was too old on a larger scale to have those conversations. Whereas I think now, as things are shifting and people thought, well, maybe that was a little too late to be having the conversations about President Biden or Kay Granger, maybe you could broach that topic when things start to look like they're not as sharp or young or whatever it is as they once was. So I think it's a conversation that I think lawmakers will start to have in Congress and kind of look out for one another if people should be leading a committee or even sitting in a congressional seat if they don't seem to have the mental stamina to do so.
Yeah, those questions of age dominating in all three branches of government between Granger, Biden, and then over on the courts beat, there's a whole battle going on right now about a federal judge in D.C. and her colleagues who have suspended her over concerns about her mental fitness. So certainly just a dominating topic this year. So now it's the end of 2024. This year's elections are over, but it's never too early to look ahead to next year and next year's election. New York City is bracing for a chaotic mayoral race next year. Current Mayor Eric Adams has vowed to continue his re-election bid despite being charged with bribery, wire fraud, and other charges. What are you watching for next year in this race to replace Eric Adams?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Of course, the mayor of New York City is always a, influential and important post in this country, and we've seen a number of candidates throw their hat in the ring to challenge Adams. As we know, as you mentioned, Adams has been defiant and wanting to run for re-election in 2025, given his a criminal indictment that he's facing. He's been accused of bribery, wire fraud, soliciting a contribution by a foreign national. So these are all things that he's still dealing with, but does want to run for re-election. But this could get messy, considering now we're hearing that a former governor, Andrew Cuomo, wants to throw his hat in the ring. And, there's a lot of familiar faces who we could see come back into the fold of the New York politics at the level of the New York City mayor. So we'll have to see if there's, maybe what I'm watching for is any new faces that come out in New York politics that will want to run. Well, it sounds like the names floated so far, like an Andrew Cuomo, are a lot of the same people that we know have been in that system for a while. So we'll see if any new people come up, or if Adams eventually does drop his bid, given the legal issues he faces.
Well, it may be a year away, but it will be here before we know it. The Hill's Alex Gangitano, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
An investigation is underway this morning into the Azerbaijan Airlines flight that crashed on Christmas Day, killing 38 passengers. New information suggests that there may have been Russian involvement in the tragic accident, but Russia is warning against forming hypotheses on the matter. News Nation's Tom Dempsey has the latest from Washington.
Earlier this morning, Azerbaijan Airlines came out saying that a preliminary cause of this plane crash right now appears to be physical and technical external interference. It's a little vague, but in a recent interview with Reuters, one of the passengers aboard the plane described hearing a loud bang shortly before the plane attempted to land at its original destination. So NATO has called for a full investigation in regards to this. Right now, investigators are likely analyzing 2 black boxes recovered from the wreckage of Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8432, which could provide vital clues as to what exactly happened, with 2 sources telling News Nation directly that early signs point to a Russian anti-aircraft system being responsible for this tragedy. The flight left Azerbaijan's capital on Wednesday to head to Grozny in Chechnya in southwestern Russia, which has been a target of Ukrainian attack drones during the ongoing war. Russia's aviation watchdog group says due to heavy fog and local alerts over Ukrainian drones, the flight diverted hundreds of miles to Kazakhstan, but the plane never made it to its destination, of course. The last moments of the plane in the air all got captured on video, and footage shows pieces of the plane scattered on the ground and destroyed. In total, 38 people died in this crash, while 29 others on board survived. Reuters cites 4 sources who say Russian air defenses downed the plane, and some reports describe how Russia diverted the plane from its airspace and jammed its GPS system. Investigators say it will take about 2 weeks to analyze the black boxes found at the crash site, but investigators may zero in on holes seen on the tail after the crash. Whether or not this plane got mistaken for a Ukrainian drone still remains officially unknown, but one of the sources who spoke to News Nation says that if that comes true and investigators find that out to be true, it once again shows how reckless Russia has been during this ongoing war in Europe. In Washington, D.C., I'm Tom Dempsey, News Nation.
With just weeks left for Democratic control of the Senate and White House, the party is raced to confirm as many judicial nominees as possible before Trump takes office. So far, Senate Democrats have confirmed 235 nominations. The move highlights the growing battle over the federal court system. Joining me now is criminal defense attorney and constitutional law expert Robert McWhirter. Robert, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start by talking about these judicial nominations. As I mentioned, President Biden has now nominated 235 federal judges that have been confirmed to lifetime appointments. This surpasses Trump's number during his first term. Biden has also made diversity a priority. He has nominated more black judges than any other president in American history. What do you make of this increased focus on the judiciary and nominations in recent years?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to say this is a remarkable achievement from the Biden administration. It is not easy to get a judge through Congress, specifically the United States Senate, especially when you have this heightened ideological environment. And so the fact that he was able to put that many qualified people on the bench is really quite remarkable. As far as the heightened kind of ideology, in some ways it's really quite sad. I would say that if you talked to a federal judge and asked how much of their job has to do with politics, they would probably say less than 1% of 1% has to do with politics. Most of their jobs are just being a good judge, handling cases, handling disputes in as fair-minded way as possible. I regularly appear in front of judges who I do not politically agree with, and they are superb judges. They were appointed by presidents that I do not agree with, but they do a very, very good job, and they're a credit to the bench. So this highly politicized, at least at the lower court level, is really kind of sad and not particularly helpful to the American people. If you're talking about Supreme Court nominees, that's a different thing. That's more of a policy defining body. But at least in the district court level and the circuit court level, all this politics is really not serving the American people either way.
With Republicans taking unified control of Washington next month, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had told Politico this week that he called it that the judiciary would be one of the strongest barriers against Trump's presidency. Do you agree with Schumer here, and do you think that many of Trump's actions on immigration and the like will end up being fought in the courts?
Well, I think you should refine what Senator Schumer said. They will be a bulwark against unconstitutional actions. Whether they're Republican presidents or Democratic presidents, it really doesn't matter. The courts stand to basically defend and support the Constitution and the rule of law. To the extent that Donald Trump and the Trump administration does not follow the rule of law and goes off on whatever populist tangent he wants to do, he will have problems with the federal court. And frankly, if you look at the cases where Donald Trump has had problems, he has not been upheld by his own appointed judges at times, by Republican appointed judges. I think that says something about the Trump administration and its choices of policy more than it says anything about the quality of the judges.
Well, we've talked about the judges that we do have. Let's talk about the judges that we don't have. President Biden on Monday vetoed a bill that would have added more than 60 new federal judgeships across the country. The bill originally had bipartisan support, that is, until after the election, when Trump's victory meant that he would have been able to nominate roughly 24 of those new seats. When Biden vetoed this bill in his veto message, he argued that reducing judges' caseloads was no longer the motivating force behind this bill. Do you think it was a mistake for Biden to veto this bill? And how much do you see the current caseload of judges as a problem in the judiciary?
Well, I think the judiciary does a remarkable job of managing the caseloads. We get the service of what are called senior judges. Basically, these are judges who have retired, but they come back and continue to give service to the United States, the American people, and the taxpayers. Basically, they've already earned their retirement, and yet they still continue to work serving all of us. So that has been a great source for managing those caseloads. As far as the merits of this bill, it's pretty hard to say that the fact that Donald Trump became his predecessor did not have a big influence on deciding to veto that bill. There was, 24 judges that Donald Trump would have immediately been able to appoint, new judgeships. Frankly, there's a great tradition of this. This goes back to when, Thomas Jefferson vetoed the Judiciary Act of 1789 because he didn't like the fact that his predecessor, John Adams, put all these Federalists on the bench. So, there's a big precedent for a president doing this. It's nothing out of the ordinary. But the fact that, he didn't get the predecessor that he wanted, I think it's hard to say that did not influence President Biden in his choice to veto this.
I also want to ask you about another action that Biden took, his commutation of 37 federal death row inmates. Trump has been responding to this by lashing out, saying that when he takes office, he will direct his Justice Department to, quote, vigorously pursue the death penalty. What authority will Trump have here, and how do you see this playing out?
Well, he has no authority to change anything that President Biden did. Donald Trump himself is the one who crows about, the great pardoning power he does, to the point where Donald Trump kind of proposes this absurd idea that a president can pardon himself. I think President-elect Trump has great plans to use the pardon power. So to him to argue that somehow President Biden didn't have the right to do this under the Constitution is going to be a pretty hollow argument, because Donald Trump intends to do a lot of pardoning in his time. As far as this issue with the death penalty and him saying the things he does and how terrible it is, I think he's just kind of howling at the moon here. The pardoning power is nearly unfettered. and there's no control over it. Congress can't say anything about it. The Senate can't. Supreme Court justices can't. It is a power of the executive, the President of the United States. Usually it's done through the Office of Pardons and Paroles, which is in the Department of Justice, but not necessarily. So really, there's nothing much that Donald Trump can do about this. And the fact that President Biden came in and did this is unfettered. And I must also say, President Biden, by doing this, has saved the American taxpayers millions of dollars in court costs and other fees. The implementation of the death penalty is extraordinarily expensive. It requires many lawyers, extra due process rights. So literally, by doing this action, he has saved us all millions and millions of dollars. Now, some people say that's an expense that should be borne. But if you look at the idea of economy, he's done a good thing to help that. And frankly, if you look at the issues of racial disparity in the implementation of the death penalty, that had to have affected President Biden in his choice to commute these sentences. These men will spend the rest of their lives in prison, and that will be the end of that.
Well, that's all I've got. Robert McWhirter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights as always, and Happy New Year.
My pleasure.
Authorities in Finland have seized a ship that they suspect of cutting an undersea cable connecting electricity from Western Europe to Estonia. According to the Finnish Prime Minister, that power cable was cut Wednesday, disrupting Estonia's power grid and infrastructure. On Thursday, the police of Finland said in a statement that they seized the Cook Islands registered ship called the Eagle S in connection to the severed cable. Officials say that the ship is also suspected of carrying Russian oil as part of Moscow's shadow fleet to circumvent sanctions. The European Commission said it would move to strengthen undersea cable protections in the wake of the cable cutting. Incoming border czar Tom Homan says there's no price tag on President-elect Trump's mass deportation plans, calling it an issue of national security. He tells News Nation's Ali Bradley that the plans will need help from Congress to get going, but that they'll save taxpayers billions of dollars in the long run. Ali is in Del Rio, Texas, with more.
Yeah, Zach, those mass deportations, we can expect them to begin on day one. And according to the incoming border czar, there may be no safe places to hide. Tom Homan telling me that he and his team are currently searching for ways that they can work around laws that prevent them from entering churches and hospitals. These are places historically off limits to immigration officials. But Homan says that they are finding exceptions for extreme cases like criminals and will not hesitate to go in after them.
We're looking at the policy now, but there are exceptions to that policy even as they exist, especially if it concerns a significant public safety threat or significant national security issue. There are waivers that people can go into those sensitive locations. We're looking at the sensitive location policy yet, not done, working on it, but we'll see where it comes out.
While Homan says that the sanctuary jurisdictions do make it a little more difficult and also create some roadblocks, he says they are not going to stop the administration from carrying out their mass deportations, saying by supporting sanctuary policies, they're actually inviting more arrests.
If you force us into the neighborhood to find a bad guy, we're probably going to find others that are with them, that aren't a criminal priority. But guess what? They're going to be arrested too. If they're in the country, United States, or they're in the United States illegally, we're not going to turn a blind eye and walk away. More agents have to go in the community, and more people are going to be arrested. That's not a threat. That's just a reality. If they don't want to protect their communities, then the Trump administration will.
Now, Zach, there are currently 13 states in the U.S. that have these sanctuary policies in place. And interesting here, San Diego County just voted to become the first sanctuary county. The sheriff there, though, saying they're not going to stop President Trump's plan for mass deportation. Sheriffs down here say they're not going to get in the way either. But, Zach, they also don't have the resources to help. So that is an issue for them down here at the southern border, Zach.
Ali Bradley, thank you for that report. More turmoil for South Korea as Parliament voted Friday to impeach acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. The move comes less than 2 weeks after Parliament stripped the former president of his powers after he implemented martial law. The country's main opposition party filed the impeachment motion against Han Thursday after he refused to fill 3 vacant seats in the Constitutional Court that will adjudicate the former president's impeachment trial. Following Parliament's impeachment vote, Han said in a statement that he respected the decision and would suspend his duties. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok is now acting president. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Zach Schonfeld. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.